Willing to please come a little bit forward so that we're a little bit closer together. Can we do that? Thank you. You're invited to sit a little bit closer if you want to. It just makes us a little bit more homey and familiar with each other. Take your hymn books and let's turn to 186. 186, I've found a friend. I found a friend, oh such a friend. He loved me ere I knew him. He drew me with the cords of love, and thus he bound me to him. And round my heart still closely twined those ties which naught can sever. For I am his and he is mine forever and forever. I found a friend, oh such a friend. He bled, he died to save me, and not alone the gift of life, but his own self he gave me. Not that I have my own, I call, I hold it for the giver. My heart, my strength, my life, my all are his and his forever. I found a friend, oh such a friend. All power to him is given to guard me on my upward way and bring me safe to heaven. Eternal glories gleam afar to nerve my faint endeavor. My heart hath touched to work toward, and then to his forever. I found a friend, oh such a friend, so kind and true and tender, so wise a cloud, so hard unkind, so mighty a defender. From him who loveth me so well, what harm my soul can sever? Shall life or death, or earth or hell, know I am his forever. And while we're talking about friends, the page right next to it, 187, Jesus, what a friend of sinners. Jesus, what a friend for sinners. Jesus, lover of my soul. Friends may fail me, foes assail me. He, my Savior,
that was a song that the speaker our night requested. And I think when you hear her story, you'll know why. Can we pray? Father, it's been a blessed Sabbath day. We've been filled already, but we still have room for more. And we want to thank you for bringing us here for this time of fellowship together, and that we can learn from each other and just praise you for what you have done for each of us. We ask your special blessing on Janie tonight as she shares her testimony from atheism to Adventism. And we pray that you'll be with her and each of us as we spend this time together. In the name of Jesus, we ask this. Amen. A month or so ago, maybe it was 2 months ago, we had here at the church the medical missionary training program. And there was a little note put out, if anybody is willing to take any of the out-of-town visitors to stay with you, please let us know. So I did say we would be happy to take somebody to our house. And I received Janie Unruh, and she came and spent a night with us. And we were busy talking, and she was telling me some of her story. And I thought, that would make a good Vespers. So she very kindly said to yes. And although we've had to change the date a couple times, once I think, she is here tonight. She comes from the Kamloops area. And I think as she tells you her story, you'll learn more about her. And I see some dentists in our audience tonight. Her husband is an orthodontist, Perry Unruh, if any of you know Perry. This is Perry's wife. Janie, we'd like to hear your story.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Ready? Okay, there we go. So I was 16 years old. My mom and dad had just newly divorced, and I had decided I didn't want to move out of state with my mom, and my dad was getting remarried and had recently remarried, and that I didn't think that was going to work out either. So I decided at 16 that I was going to go on my own way. Prior to this, I had lived a very worldly life, and to my shame, I can say that God has brought me far, and I know He has a long ways more to take me, but I was a runaway. I was into drugs, drinking, had a fake ID, was bouncing from bar to bar. Basically, I was doing all the worldly things and thinking that I was having fun. And then when I moved out, I already been it was a fine line whether I got kicked out of high school or whether I left. And because in our high school, the dogs were coming to sniff through the lockers, and as soon as I heard that, I thought, well, either I wait for them to come to me and kick me out, or I just leave. So I left. And then I ran away for quite some time, and my parents didn't know where I was. And so I learned to be self-sufficient at a very young age. And I would say I was probably about 11 years old when I started this delinquent life. And I decided at one point when I moved out of the home, so I realized, I think I better get my act together. Here I am, 16 years old already, and I'm not in high school anymore, and so I'm going to have to take care of myself. So I got myself a job. I went and talked to the principal again and said that I was ready to come back and finish my high school, and I got myself a car, and so then just started to basically live my life. And I thought, okay, here I am now taking care of myself. I'd gone to church a couple of times with my folks, and many times what they would do, this kind of gives you more of insight of where I was. They would drop us off. It was a very long church and not very deep, and our folks would drop my older brother and me off on one end of the church, and we would go in through the glass doors, and as they drove away, we would wave, and then we would tear down the corridor, out the other door. We would go to the drugstore, steal some cigarettes, and then come back sit on the outside of the wall, smoking our cigarettes, making fun of all the other Sunday school children who were in the rooms. And so that kind of gives you a little bit of an insight of the terror I brought to my parents at that time. And of course, I thought it was great fun at that time, and now it brings me horror of what I've done. And but it was my life, and so that's the way it was. So here I am sitting in my apartment, and I thought, okay, now I've been to church a couple of times, and now I have to decide for me, is God real or not? Because now I'd gotten myself into school again, I'd gotten myself a car, a job, and I had to literally change everything about my life because I now was responsible for me. I changed my friends, I changed my clothes, I had to look more presentable, like a presentable young woman who didn't want to invite problems into my life, and I quit the drugs, I quit the smoking, and I continued for a little while to continue to drink, but not very much. And so I started making all these life changes, drastic life changes, because now I'm completely responsible for myself, and I didn't want to get caught up in prostitution. I didn't want terrible things to happen to me. So I knew I needed to make changes very quickly. And so I did. I even changed my language. I changed the way I sat, the way I walked. And now it was time for me to decide, is God real or is he not real? So I thought about the few people in my life who called themselves a Christian. And now keep in mind, I was 16 years old and rebellious. And so I'm looking at the people in my life who called themselves a Christian, and I just thought, if that's the way God is, I don't want anything to do with God. And then I thought, okay, is that going to be my only basis if God is real or not? And then I started thinking about Christmas and how it was so fun to play games on the little children, us, that Santa Claus is real. And I just thought, okay, Santa Claus was supposedly real when I was growing up, and he was real, and we gave him cookies and milk, on Christmas Eve, and they were gone in the morning, and in its place we had plenty of presents, and so, and then I found out soon after that Santa Claus was not real. So it was like a fun on us. For some reason the adults thought it was really fun to pretend like there was a Santa Claus and then make us believe it. So I thought, okay, if Santa Claus was supposedly real and I can't see him, can't touch him, and this was some great fun to deceive us little children, then I thought, okay, then from these same people are trying to tell me that God is real. And I can't see God, I can't touch him, can't talk to him. Who is he? So it must be some kind of a game again. And I don't think that God is real at all. And so I continue to think, okay, is God real or not real based upon these two decisions? And then I kind of thought through it, and I thought, you know what? I can't believe in a God that would burn people in hell forever and ever and ever and ever. I thought that would be an absolute tyrant. That would be worse than Hitler or Stalin or any of the evil people in this world who have lived and created massive murders on an unprecedented scale. And I just thought of those three, I thought, you know what? Even if God is real, I want nothing to do with a God who would burn people forever and ever. So at that moment, in my 16-year-old thinking, I said, no, God is not real. And in that moment, I became an atheist. I didn't think about God. I had no conversations about him. There was no anger. There was no upset. He just didn't exist. It was just a nothing. Why even talk about a nothing? There was nothing to look forward to when we died. We just died. And that was the end of our life. And so I proceeded then to live my life as I saw fit and in what I assumed was a responsible life. And, getting back in school, and I finished 2 years of high school in 1 year, so that kind of tells you the drive that I had. And I certainly worked towards that because I still wanted to graduate with my class. So I finished high school, and then I went into the military and did almost 8 years in the Army. And it was the best thing that I ever did at that time. And then, as I started, I got enrolled into a university, and within the first day of my university, I sat next to a man on the outside of the library, and that was like it for my heart. And he just became the love of my life. For the next 5 years, we just had unabated joy and happiness together, lots and lots of fun. We were both adrenaline junkies, motorcycling, and to kind of give you an idea, I'll tell you one story, but I have many, is that between our apartment and the university that we both went to, there was a freeway that was just being built. So we waited and waited and waited and waited, months for it to be built. And then we read in the newspaper that the next morning it was going to be opening up for the public. So we thought, oh, okay. So that means that the road is completely available. And that means that if they're opening up in the morning, and this was in the evening time, let's go take a ride on this new road when we know that there's nobody there. And so we got on the motorcycle, and any of you who are motorcycle enthusiasts, we had a Ninja 1100 that we're talking about a while ago here, and that was one of the fastest bikes on the market at the time. And we decided that we were going to de-virginize this freeway. And so we flew through the barrier, and on we went as fast as that bike could take us. And then at the end, see, we really didn't know where the end was, and we went to the end, and at the end was a police station. And we did not know that, and so my boyfriend at that time, before we got married, he said, let's do it again. Since if we're already going to get caught, we might as well de-virginize the other side too. And so we did. We flew down the other side. I won't tell you what speed. Anyone who knows what a Ninja did back then, you know the speed we went. And so we were flying, and then all of a sudden, my arms are wrapped around his belly, and all of a sudden I felt the tap. And he always did that when it meant hang on. And so I thought, oh, there must be like a police officer behind us. So I looked behind us and there was nothing. And so I looked in front, And across the whole way was a barrier. And the freeway barriers, which meant don't come through here. And they were all the way across. And I saw that the widest part of the barriers were only about that wide. Otherwise, it was strictly fully across from one side to the other. And so I thought, okay, at least he can hang on, and I'm going to let go. I know he's expecting me to hang on tighter, but I thought, if one of us is going to live, it might as well be him, because at least he has a fighting chance to live without me hanging on too. So I actually just let go. And I put my cheek on his back, and I just said to myself, it's been really wonderful knowing you. And by that, at that time we were fully in love, and I just let go. And I thought, that's the end. And I closed my eyes, and it was several seconds later, I heard cars going by us. And I didn't open my eyes, and I thought, okay, so what's happened here? And I did open up my eyes, and we're like on the freeway. And I looked back, and we had gone through the barriers, even though I looked at the width of our motorcycle with the pegs and everything, and there was physically no way we could have gotten through that barrier. And so I really didn't know what to think of it, but it kind of always intrigued me what happened. And then another time when we were on quads, and we were around doing some huge sand dunes. We're on some quads, and I was just learning to quad, and he was much of a superior rider than me. He had been riding since he'd been a little tyke, and I was just learning, and he and several friends were taking a part of this huge dune that you could put a gigantic house into it, and it would just be engulfed. I mean, huge. And I knew I couldn't do it. I didn't have the capability yet to be able to do that. So what I did do was what I could do. And instead of going around, I decided to go down. And so, which I could do very good. And so I hit the throttle, and I went down as fast as I could, and just about 15, 20 feet before I hit the very bottom is when I had the highest speed going, and all of a sudden my front end hit a big rock that the sand was covering. It flipped me up and flipped me over the bike. The bike landed right on top of me, and we continued to roll down the rest of the hill together, and it kept bouncing on me. And it broke several ribs, and my helmet was just completely trashed, and thankfully I had one, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. And in that experience, I was in a big tunnel, and I saw this big, long tunnel that I could barely see the other end. And in the tunnel, there were arms coming from both sides, and just from here down, and that's it. And just arms, and they were just like this, just so loving. And it said that you will be saved, you will live if you take my hand. And something said to me, don't take that hand. And when I said, because it was so drawing, it was so loving and so kind, and like a loving kindness that I'd never really understood before, and I was fearful of it. And so I said, this is going to be bad if I take one of these hands. Now I was unconscious at this time, and having this experience, and so I decided, nope, I am not taking one of those hands, and then I came to myself, and I realized what had happened, and I woke up, and I never really understood. That was a second example that kind of happened in my life that I really couldn't explain what happened. And it was so profound in my life at that time as an atheist that I couldn't even talk about it. I couldn't talk about it for days and days later. And so I did tell Mike about it, my boyfriend at that time, and but it was very disturbing. I could not explain it. And so we continued on in our journey together. He had asked me to marry him. This would be in June of 1993. He asked me to marry him. And I said yes and no. And he said, well, is that yes or no? And I said, well, as soon as I get out of college and I'm out of my nursing school, then ask me and I'll say yes. So we continued to date for another year, which would have made that about 4.5 years that we were together. And when I did graduate, he asked me, and I said yes. And so that would have been a year before. So in June of 93, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes, and we set our wedding for 1 year later. And during that time, I wanted to finish some more schooling. He wanted to finish more schooling, and during that year, we just had a wonderful time. And then, I should say, up to those years, we had a wonderful time. And then after we were engaged, 3 weeks later, we found out he had cancer. And then as he's on his way to the surgeon to actually look, because 1 year earlier, as a nursing student, I knew that he had cancer. So I told him, I said, I think you really need to go see a doctor to get diagnosed because you have symptoms of cancer. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor told him, will you go home and tell your girlfriend that you're too young for cancer? And never did any testing or anything. And basically sent him home to do a sitz bath and to watch any bleeding. And so at that time we were living together, and I was doing his laundry, and about a year later I noticed again that he was bleeding. And I said, boy, you sure have more symptoms again, like you have cancer. I'm quite certain you have cancer. And so by this time he had a different insurance company, and he went back to the insurance company, to a new doctor, and they said, yes, you do have colon cancer, but and had you caught it 1 year earlier, that it probably wouldn't be as bad as it is. So within days, he was in surgery, and the doctor came out after, it was probably 20 minutes, or I don't remember, it just wasn't very long. And that doctor confirmed again, yes, his cancer has metastasized from his colon to his liver, and it's everywhere. And all I could do was just look to see how prolific it was and sew him back up again. I'm really sorry. There's nothing more I can do. And after a couple of weeks of healing, then I'm going to send you off to chemotherapy. So during this time, one of my fiance at that time, his mother, who I adore, and she had a best friend, Jan. And Jan shared with us her story and about how she was in the ICU, and she was in a coma or unconscious and unresponsive. And so she was listening to, she was on a ventilator, and her husband and her doctor are talking over her supposed dead body. And she's listening to them talk about pulling the plug on her. And she's hearing this whole thing. And she's like screaming in her head, what do you mean? What do you mean pulling the plug on me? I'm alive. So she's trying to wiggle her toes, wiggle her fingers, open up her eyelids. She's trying to talk. But of course, she's medicated, so she's not able to move. So she finally realized that there was nothing that she could do on her own to either live or die. She couldn't continue to live, of course, if they pulled the plug on her. And she couldn't die because she was on a ventilator. And she said, okay, God, whatever you want for me is fine. If you want me to die, then have them pull the plug. If you want me to live, then you have to do it. And she walked out of the hospital the next day. And as an atheist, I was like, yeah, okay, I mean, that's really nice. You know, I'm really glad this happened for you, you know, wonderful lady. And but I never really thought about it. Just kind of went in one ear and out the other. And that was probably my first spiritual conversation. Well, it was a one-way conversation. And that was the only spiritual thing that anyone had ever told me in years. Since at 16 years old, I had no spiritual conversation with anybody about anything because God didn't exist. I mean, why talk about something that just is like Santa Claus? And so I just forgot about it, and he went into surgery, and then he went in to get his chemotherapy, and from that time onward, he just can't get worse and worse and worse. He was 6'6", 250 pounds. Just a big strapping man, and I just a big teddy bear that I just adored and loved more than anything, more than my own life. And we decided when he started getting really bad that we moved our wedding up then from June of the following year up to December 17th. Because the doctor said he probably didn't even have 6 more months left to live, and this was probably around October. And so we moved it up to December 17th of 93, and we continued to take him in for to get blood transfusions. We took him to be research participants. We took him to the Mayo Clinic. We took him to see every doctor. We put him on what I knew of diet and lifestyle, and it was because of him that I actually got into the profession that I am now, and which now I'm a PhD in public health, and I teach people how to reverse and prevent disease in order to prevent from going through what I went through, which was a huge amount of pain. And so I switched to a couple of canned vegetables, and someone said eat more fruits and vegetables. So I went to the grocery store and got some canned fruit and canned vegetables, swimming in sugar and everything. I didn't know. And, for the white pasta, and someone said eat more rice. And so I got some white rice and, go, make sure that you're exercising. Okay, so we kind of went out and walked, for 10, 15 minutes. And I mean, no direction really, nothing concrete. So, but we just did, what we knew. And he just kept getting worse and worse. But I'll tell you, we loved each other, and we continued to move along. And so finally on December 9th, the doctor said he won't make it to December 17th. He probably doesn't even have 24 hours left to live. And so we decided that he asked me, do you still want to get married? And of course I said yes. I don't want you to leave me, your fiance. I want to be left your wife. I want that honor and of being your wife. And so we had a beautiful sit-down wedding, which his mom and Jan, her best friend, got together on 24 hours. Got the priest, got the Catholic Church, because they were Catholic, and got everything ready, called our entire guest list. We had about 150 people there that flew in from all over the United States to our wedding on a 24-hour notice. When he and I were talking about who do I want to be, in the bridal party, and who he was going to have as groomsmen, he said he wanted 17 best men. And I said, well, okay, you can have 17 men, but you have to have like one who's going to hold the ring. You can't have 17. And I was like, no, I'm going to have 17 best men. And I was like, who are your 17 best friends? And he named off like 17 people, and I was thinking, they are his best friends. How would he choose? And so he said, they can just decide who's going to hold the ring themselves. And so that was kind of, that shows how much people loved him. He was just a wonderful man, and I don't say that because he's deceased. He really was a wonderful man. And so we got married then on December 10th of 94, on that 24-hour notice. And it was the most beautiful sit-down wedding that you could imagine. We didn't even know if he'd even make it that far, even that night. And but he did. And 2 days later, he did end up on his deathbed. And the whole family was around, and some friends, and there were probably, I don't know, maybe 15 people around. And I was an ICU nurse, burn nurse at that time, and so I well knew what all the monitors meant. I knew what, I knew what the vitals meant. I knew what fluids he was getting. I knew the medications he was getting. I was quite familiar with everything. And of course, I knew the assessment of what I was looking for in this man that was now my husband of 2 days. And I looked at him, and I knew he probably had about 2 minutes left to live. He was gray. His bodily functions had stopped. Couple days, for a couple of days, it was going down and down and down. And over the past many hours or that day, pretty much everything stopped when he actually entered into the hospital. He could barely open up his eyelids. He was very pale, very weak, and I looked at him and I was thinking, you know what? He's probably only got about 2 minutes left to live. And so I asked all of his family and friends, and I said, would you mind if I just had a couple of minutes alone with him? And of course, everybody knew that when I would come back, he would be gone. And so I sat on the edge of the bed with him, and I held his hand, and I recalled that Jan's story of when she was in the ICU, and how miraculously she walked home from the hospital the next day. And for some reason, that thought, that story came into my mind, and so now my head is bowed. I've never talked to God before, never prayed, and I sat with his hand in my hands, and I bowed my head, more in pain than anything else. Not respect, because I didn't know God. I didn't even know what I was doing. And I felt defeated. Here I am, an ICU nurse in a burn center, no less, and I can save the lives of other people, but I can't even save the life of my husband. And I felt like a complete failure. And so I recalled this story that Jan had shared with me, and my head is bowed, and I thought, okay, I'm recounting. Okay, we've tried diet and exercise, what we knew, and we've tried surgery and chemo and research participant and every single doctor you could imagine, and the Mayo Clinic, and then that thought came in, and I thought, okay, might as well try Jesus too. Something else to try. I'm willing to try anything. And so I just prayed, and I didn't really know it was called prayer, but now I can look back, and obviously that's what it was. And I just said, God, if you're there, you've got to reveal yourself to me, because I can't believe in a God that I don't know. And please heal my husband. And that was the extent of my prayer. And tears are coming down my face, and I walk into the bathroom in his private hospital room, and I mean, how long does it take to go to the bathroom? And I'm out, and he's sitting on the edge of the bed. And I'm like, the first thing I think of was, what a poor ICU nurse you are. You can't even tell when someone's dying. And yet I had seen death before. And so I just thought, wow, okay, I just couldn't even, I just put it all upon myself. And then as I walked out in complete disbelief, he said, honey, will you do something with me? And that was the first clear words that he'd spoken in hours, because his kidneys had shut down, his bowels had shut down, mega toxins in his body. Nothing was functioning properly. And in this clear, handsome voice, he said, honey, will you do something with me? And I said, sure, what would you like? And he said, will you say the Lord's Prayer with me? I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, I'm an atheist, you're a non-practicing Catholic, but okay. We both heard the Lord's Prayer a couple of times in our life. And so I sat down and we started to pray, and we both knew the words. We fumbled, our Father, who art in heaven, and whatever words we said after that, we didn't have a clue of what we were saying, obviously. And but then we're just fumbling these words, and he said, I think there's this word in that prayer, and I said, I think I've heard this word, and he said, well, it's obvious that we don't know this prayer. And this is a very solemn moment. There was no smiles on our face. And he said, would you mind if I used my own words? We obviously don't know this prayer. And I said, no, go ahead. And so he said, God, I'm not asking for a lifetime. I'm just asking for a little bit of time with my new wife. Will you just give me a little bit time, please? And that was his prayer. And he walked out of the hospital the next day. And it was just like amazing. I mean, it was a miracle. And the doctors called it a miracle. The nurses didn't know what to say. They just said they'd never seen anything like this happen before. And I didn't know. I had no idea what just happened. I was an atheist. I had no Christian thoughts in my mind at all. I didn't correlate anything. We're talking much later here. And so and then he says in this clear voice, will you go get my family and friends? I'd like to have a circle prayer. What's a circle prayer? I've never heard of that before. I'm just being, things are being thrown at me. I don't even know what's happening. And I said, okay. I figured when I came back, I would find out what a circle prayer is. So I went down to the waiting room, and his family and friends started to cry, realizing that I was going to tell them that he had passed away. But instead, I said, Mike is calling for everybody to do a circle prayer. Everybody jumped up, and we're walking down. And let me back up 1 minute. 1 minute before this, walking down the hall. So I walk out of the bedroom, the hospital room, and I'm in this big bubble of love, this big bubble of support, of it's going to be okay, but the love that I have never ever known before, it enveloped me bigger than my body. And I remember looking down because it was so big, and it was so encompassing, and it felt so good that I literally looked down and I had to touch myself because it was so unusual, but it was so comforting. And so I'm like, wow, somebody must realize that I'm really hurting in here, and they must be thinking good thoughts for me or having compassion on me. And I looked around and there was nobody. This is a cancer ward, and there's nobody around. There wasn't a nurse, there wasn't a doctor, and the one person was the secretary sitting at her desk, and her head was down writing, and she had not a clue that I was right there. So I thought, this is very strange. So I thought, oh, maybe I saw a corridor going both ways, a little ways down, and I thought, well, maybe it was somebody going down there. So I hurried and I walked down and I looked both ends of the corridor, nobody, nothing. And I thought, where is this love coming from? Where is this compassion and support coming from? And I embraced it. It was so wonderful. And so I'm just kind of wondering in my mind what is happening to me. And I walked to the waiting room, and then now I'll finish that story. And so his family and friends are walking down, and I'm thinking, okay, it must be maybe one of his family members or a friend, has compassion, and I'm feeling it or something. I just couldn't explain it. So I let all of them go first to see if someone would stop and talk to me. And maybe it was, this love was coming from them and compassion. But no one cared about me. I mean, they just walked off and they just cared about, going to see Mike and, for this circle prayer. And so I'm walking behind everybody. I'm like, where is this love coming from? And so we get into the room, and Mike explains what this circle prayer is. He's laying in bed, and we all get into a circle, and we're holding hands, and each person goes around and says a prayer. When that prayer comes around to me, I don't even remember what I said, but what I do remember is the experience that what I prayed, and that I realized that my voice, my words, were actually way beyond the ceiling of this room. And that this is no ordinary experience. I felt and knew in my head that there was somebody outside of this room that was listening to me, and it was beyond the ceiling. And then all of a sudden I realized that I believed in Jesus. I had no idea where that came from, because why does God have to be a man? Why can't God be a woman? I reasoned with myself. And how can a man be God? How can, even if God was a man, how can a man be God? And how can Jesus, who walked on earth, be God? I was reasoning, where did this come from? How do I all of a sudden know that Jesus was God? And then another thing that just popped into my mind, I knew the Bible was real. I knew I could read it and it was true. And I'm thinking, where did that come from? And then that, yes, Jesus is my Savior, and that I could trust him. I had these thoughts that I had no idea where they came from, but yet I also had still my atheistic thoughts. So here I am like a ping pong ball in my head. Where do these thoughts about Jesus come from and the Bible? And how do I know that I can trust him when I don't even know who he is? They were just, boop, just like there. And it literally was like a ping pong game in my head. But I'm an atheist. How can I believe in Jesus? I don't believe in the Bible. It's just filled with a bunch of fairy tales. So I learned eventually to, what this was. But what happened is, so the next day when he was ready to go home, we used to have a Trans Am, and it was my car, and it was lowered. It had all the fun exhaust that a young person would like, and it had, of course, the speed for somebody who was an adrenaline junkie like I was, and it had T-top bars, and it was the pace car for the Nationals of that year. I just bought it off of the racetrack. And so it was a pretty hot-looking car for a young lady at that time. And so I take the T-tops off, and I put them in the trunk. And if you know what a Z28 trunk looks like, it's about that big. And it's just big enough to get your T-tops in there, and nothing else can fit. So here we are, we're driving, and we're going home. And I told Mike, I said, boy, it feels like there's someone in the car with us. And he said, yeah, that's kind of funny. I feel the same way. it's like there's somebody here. And I said, yeah, there's just like so much love and so much support and compassion. And he's like, yeah, I feel the same way. So here I am, I'm adjusting the rear view mirror to look to see if someone's hiding in the back of the trunk, a trunk that's that big. And I'm looking in the back seat, behind me and behind him. And I'm just thinking, no, there's nobody here. And he's like, yeah, this is very strange. So we make it home, and it was dark by now. And so what this means to me is I used to have an unusual, very high fear of the dark. And when I came home, every light came on, and if I ever thought that there was a possibility that I'd come home after dark, then the lights stayed on all day until I got home at night. And when I got home, I checked in the bathtub, I checked in every large cupboard that anyone could hide in. I looked under the beds, I looked everywhere, just to make sure that no one was in the house, and even with all the lights on. So we're getting home now in the evening time, and I walk through, Mike says, will you go get my wheelchair? And the wheelchair was in the back bedroom and on the opposite end of the house. And I walked into the house and did not turn on a light. And I was already halfway through to the back bedroom when I realized, wow, this person that was in the hospital and now was in the car, they're in the house. This big bubble of love and compassion and support. And so I went and I thought, no, I want to know, I don't want this person to go away, because as soon as I look for him, he's going to disappear on me. So I don't even want to turn on the light. And so I got the wheelchair, went through a completely dark house again with no fear. And my husband now of 3 days, I bring him into the front door, and he looked at me very strange, because he knew all the lights had to come on, and he looked at me and he's like, there's no lights on. And we just looked at each other, and I smiled, and then we went in and I turned on the lights, and I've never had a fear of the dark since. And so for the next 37 days after that, we were married a total of 40 days. And my one prayer was, even though I still had all these atheistic thoughts, I knew that prayer worked. He would wake me up in the middle of the night, and God would just wake him up with verses. And of course, I didn't know anything about the Bible, so I'd have to look on page 1, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, okay, where's Ephesians at? And what page number is, flip to the page number. I had no idea what order the Bible was in, so it always took me a while. And I would read these verses, and they were so applicable, speaking to us. Night after night after night, he would wake me up, and sometimes several nights, and we would just read the Bible, and we would pour out our convictions to each other. We would apologize to each other, and it was just so cleansing. We really weren't talking to God per se, because we were so new and we didn't have anyone to guide us. But what we acted upon what we were reading, and what we knew was that we were being cleansed. We were being molded by the Mighty One, and it was just like a phenomenal experience. And then my one prayer that I could say hundreds and hundreds of times, without exaggeration, I said, God, if you're real, please have him not die and I'm away, or I'm go to the grocery store, or I'm cooking something, or I'm taking a shower. Please, I don't want him to die fearful and alone. I want to be holding him when he dies. And that was just constantly, whenever I went anywhere, anytime I left his side, God, please don't let him die while I walk out of this room. And so on January 19th, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, he woke me up again with another scripture. This morning, I could not wake up. I was so exhausted. just from entertaining people, his family and friends all day, and then he keeping me up all night. And he got to sleep all day while I entertained, and then we were up all night together, just praying and reading the Bible and being convicted and talking, and he could not wake me up. He tried again and again. I just got another verse. Will you read this to me? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I can't read right now. Can you write it down? I just need some sleep. And finally, at about 6 o'clock in the morning, he asked me to help get him out of bed on a bedside chair. So that was the only thing that finally got me out of bed, and because I had to help him out of bed. And then as soon as I put him in that bedside chair, he told me some very lovely things. And he said, had I known how wonderful it was going to be married to you, I would have forced you to marry me the first time I asked you. And, he told me some very wonderful things that a wife would only yearn to hear from her husband. And it was just a beautiful moment. And then he said, will you go get a glass of water for me? And I knew right then, that was the moment. And he said, it's time. Because I said, are you going to be here when I come back? And he said, it's time. And I said, what do you mean it's time? I just couldn't comprehend it. I didn't want it to be real. And he said, it's time. And I said, no, it can't be time. And he said some beautiful things to me, and he said, will you go get me a glass of water? And I said, are you going to be here when I come back? And he said, yes. So I went and got the glass of water, and just as I walked into the room, I knew he had a stroke. And we locked eyes for that moment, and he had a stroke, and his prayer was that I want to die in the arms of my two favorite women, and that was his mother and his wife. And I happened to invite his mom to spend the night with us that night. And so at 6 o'clock in the morning, when I saw him have a stroke on the bedside chair, I ran to her bedroom and I said, help me to get him on the chair. Back in bed again. And he's just had a stroke, so please help me. And we both lifted him up like he was a feather. And it was like, boom, we just lifted dead weight up, from a chair onto the bed as if it was nothing. And it caught me off guard. I was like, oh, that's okay. That was easier than I thought. I've lifted many patients before with dead weight. I know what that is like. But I didn't stop really to think about it. But I knew something had just happened there. And I was like, wow, an angel must have just helped us lift him up on to this bed. And so I put his back to my chest to expand his lungs. And then his mom sat on the edge of the bed and held his hand. And there he died in the arms of his two favorite women. And of course, all those feelings come back. How is it that I can save the world, but I can't save my husband? How is it that I can save all these ICU patients and severely burned patients, but yet I can't save my husband? What a poor nurse you are. And I had to fight not calling the 911. I just, because we'd already talked about it, he did not want 911 called when his time was up. He wanted just to go peacefully, and he wanted to go at home in the arms of his two favorite women. And so we had the memorial, and then my brother and I, who was also very close to Mike, he actually lived with us for a while, and the two of them got very close. I actually gave up my job for my brother, so that kind of shows you the dynamics of how close we are. And him and I decided to go from Redlands, California, to which is near Loma Linda, and we decided to go up to Oregon, near Portland, where my grandparents were, because we were very close to them, and just get some kind of R&R time and just kind of just kind of downtime and just kind of rethink things through. And so I was telling my brother for hours and hours, I was telling him this experience that I had. and with, this spiritual experience and this high and this big bubble of love and compassion and support and the Bible readings and the convictions but yet, I'm kind of an atheist in my mind. I'm still a ping pong ball, but yet I'm praying to God. How can I still be an atheist and I'm praying to God? I didn't understand it, but I welcomed it. I just continued to pray, and I still had these atheistic thoughts in my mind, and I just went with it. And I didn't fight it, because all I knew was that I wanted this love. I needed this support. And for hours and hours and hours, I was telling my brother about all of this love and how wonderful it is, and it's bigger than me. And then all of a sudden, I thought to myself, I wonder if I'm just kind of making this up myself. Am I just kind of delusional because I miss my husband that much? Or, and it's just kind of, and I'm just kind of working myself up. And I thought, I wonder if I could just make it go away just by my thoughts. Bam, just like that, it was gone. And I became suicidal. And I'm grabbing my seatbelt. My brother, who was a speed freak as well, he's flying down the freeway at abnormal speeds, and I am grabbing the seatbelt, and I'm screaming, I'm crying, and he's holding on to my seatbelt here, and he's holding on to my seatbelt, and I'm pounding on his hand and say, let me go, let me go, let me go. I just want to die. I just want to get out. And he's like, what happened? What happened? We're having this very compassionate, conversation, dialogue between us. And I'm pounding on his hand, and I'm crying and crying. And all of the pain just weighted upon me. It was like hundreds of pounds just landed right on my shoulders. And the full understanding of the depth of my husband's gone, the love of my life. How can I live anymore? I can't take this pain. It's too much. It's bigger than me now. I used to feel this big bubble of love that was bigger than me, and now my pain is bigger than me. I can't take it. And he's yelling at me, what happened? What happened? And I just said, get your hand off my seatbelt. I just want to die. I just can't take it. And I was not being so calm. And he said, I will take my hand off if you just tell me what happened. And I said, okay, take your hand off and I'll tell you what happened. And I told him just what I told you, that all the pain just came. And then it was 2 hours before my grandparents' home. And for 2 hours, we said not a word to each other. He was trying to figure out probably what happened, and I'm figuring out what just happened. What did I just do? This was obviously something supernatural. This was not me. And by the time we got to my grandparents' home, it was nighttime. It was probably 8 o'clock at night. And I just hugged both my grandparents, and I said, would you mind if I just go to bed? And they said, no, go ahead. And I just went into my room, and I was just crying and crying. And I got down on my knees, and I said, God, if this is really you, please, I'm very, very sorry I did this. I didn't know what I was doing. Please come back, because I feel like this is not normal, what just happened to me. And please come back. Please come back. Please don't let all of this pain, be upon me anymore. And I was just crying, and I didn't even stand up. I just crawled, from a kneeling position on the bed, and I just crawled into bed, and I just said, God, I don't even want to live. Just take my breath away. Because before Mike died, I told him that I would go be with him, and that when he died, I would too. And I just knew that I would take my Trans Am, and I would just drive off the Big Bear mountain, where there's no guardrails or anything, but you've got quite a steep hill, mountains there. And I just knew I would just drive off. I mean, I had no second thoughts or qualms about losing my life. I just thought, if there is an afterlife, I want to be with him. But after God came into my life, I was not to do that. So, but after I wondered in the car, all of that came back to me again. And I didn't even want to live. And so I just said, God, if you're real, just take all of this away from me. I don't even want to wake up in the morning. I just take my breath away, because I can't do myself in, because I can't. But you can do it. And I just cried myself to sleep. And I woke up the next morning, and the big bubble of love was back. And that all of that weight that had been on my shoulders had been lifted. And I just thank God and I praise God so much for his loving kindness. And, I'm looking at the time right now, and so this was only part of my walk then to becoming an Adventist. So I can either continue or I can just end right here, and it's... I'll leave Twyla the final say. Say until like 8:30. Is that too long? Okay. Okay. So we came. I had then now that morning now was when I realized I'm a born again Christian. I'm one of those people that I've read about. I'm actually not an atheist anymore. And that was the first time I realized I really wasn't an atheist, and that this whole time it was the Holy Spirit working. I didn't understand it, but all I knew was that this was God working in my life. So I now was on the search to find other people who found what I found. And I was then going from church to church to church. This Catholic church and that Catholic church and this Catholic church and that one and this one and that one. And I was going to probably 10 or 11 churches a week, because I would look to find out from what town to what town. And I was looking at all of the churches and what time. I was making 3 to 4 services on Sunday morning, and I had a whole calendar. I was going on Sunday night and I was going on Monday night, Tuesday night, every night of the week. And I just continued to search and search. And I could not find what I wanted. I couldn't find a group of people who found what I found. And so I was then my brother and I decided to go visit my mom, which was up in Washington. And so I was telling my mom my dilemma, and my mom was a Christian. And so I was telling her my dilemma, that I'm trying to find people who found what I found. I need to find somebody, because there's got to be somebody in the world who's found what I found. I'm not the only one. And I've looked and looked, and I can't find anybody, but I don't think I'm so special that something unique has happened to me. And so I went from one church to another, and she said, well, why don't you try the Pentecostal church, the Foursquare Pentecostal church? And so I tried that. And I walked into a church like you wouldn't believe, and I found the group of people who found what I found. People totally in love with the Lord. People who just couldn't wait for Sunday worship to come around. People who were in Bible study, and people who loved to praise Him and talk to Him. And it was just like, wow, God, finally I found, and it was so wonderful. So I went there for a couple of weeks, and then I went back to California to try to find now the group of people again. Now that I know there's people out there who found what I found, now I have to go find them in my own hometown. And so I continued then to go from church to church to church, 5, 10, 15, probably 11 a week. And I would always pray, okay, God, I'm in the parking lot of this church at this time on this day, and show me if this is the church that you want for me. Somehow convict me, speak to me. And I did this again and again and again, and nothing came. And I'm like, Lord, there's got to be a group of people down here who have found what I found. And so I then started sharing my faith with my family. My little niece, who was only 7 years old at that time, my sisters little girl. I was sharing with her about the love of God, and she said, "You know what, Auntie? I want Jesus too." So we sat on the floor of the garage, of the open garage in my sister's house, and she accepted the Lord. And she just blossomed into a whole new young lady. And then my sister was like, "Hey, what happened to my daughter and my sister? I want what you guys want, what you guys have too." So she accepted the Lord. And then my brother's looking on, and I invited him to a Greg Laurie, one of those massive auditorium, with tens of thousands of people, and evangelistic night. And I saw my brother because we got separated. He sat in one place and I sat in the other because my friend that I was with was a sister to the band, so we got special seats. And my brother and somebody else went and sat somewhere else. And so we said we'd meet at this certain place at this certain time. So we waited and waited. And I saw my brother way down there, and I knew something wonderful had happened to him too. And he ran when he saw me, and he hugged me so tight. And he says, "You know, my sister, I'm a Jesus freak now too." And I mean, you just, when you see someone born again, you just can't mistake it, right? And so now I'm going to church with my siblings and just having like the time of my life. And then I found a couple of non-denominational churches. And God said to one, "This is where you're going to stay. This is your church for now, but don't get too comfortable." I got that message clear as day. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know how long I'd be there, under what circumstances I would leave. All I knew was I was not to get too comfortable. So I continued to worship with my family and had a wonderful time. And then I knew that God was calling me to the mission field. And I was fighting it. "No, God, I can hardly even get out of bed in the morning, much less go to work. And now you want me to leave the country and help other people? It's just not going to happen." But my sister with her kids, went to a family camp, and she kept prodding me to come. But it's a long story how I got there, but I ended up there. And I know that the devil was really trying to prevent me from going, because you wouldn't believe the struggle. It'd probably take me about 5 minutes to tell you that story, but pretty incredible. But I did end up going in the end. And on my way up to Apple Valley, my conscience and my heart was just bam, bam, bam. It was like just ready to pop out of my chest. And the thought was, "I want you to be a missionary." And I just kept saying, "No, no, no, I'm not going to be a missionary." And then it just was so strong in my heart and so strong in my mind. And I just felt like I was going to have a heart attack. It was scary. And I remember driving up, and I finally submitted. And I put my hand like this, and I slapped my steering wheel, and I said, "Fine, God, I'll go be a missionary, but you have to do it all. I'm not doing anything to make those steps happen. So if you want it to happen, you make it happen." And so I went to this family camp, and there were a couple of missionaries from Mexico. And boy, I tell you, I felt so drawn to them. I couldn't wait until they were done talking. And I talked to them, and they invited me to be a missionary down in Mexico with them. And so I went down there, spent a couple of weeks, and just dug ditches. And when she found out I was an ICU nurse, I started doing nursing to people in the community and start talking about medical needs, and had a wonderful time. And then I came back and got involved with the SIMS program, Student International Mission Services from Loma Linda. I was not an Adventist. I never even knew what an Adventist was, even though I lived there for many years. I'd never even heard the term Adventist, and I lived in the Loma Linda area, San Bernardino, for 12 years. Had no idea that Loma Linda Hospital was even Adventist. I never even heard the word Adventist. And that kind of, shows how far I was from God, right? And so I was doing mission trips with the SIMS program, going down to Ilongo, Mexico once a month for a while, and because I was already a registered nurse, they were students. I was able to do help a lot in many ways that the students couldn't because I had a license. And so then I started doing 2-week trips and 3-week trips with the Quiet Hour and AFM and ADRA and just short-term missions and then I knew that God was calling me to do, because it would take me a while to explain how this all happened, but these are all just like miracles. How I got to each one of these places with the Adventists, which I considered to be, I was unequally yoked with them. But I knew that God was calling me. I could not mistake that voice. I knew that he kept calling me to these missions and the places that I went to, and I just couldn't deny it. And I couldn't understand it, but I just followed the voice as I knew that I should have and I wanted to. And so I knew God was calling me to do longer term missions and to quit my work. And so I started looking everywhere, started calling up everybody who wanted a nurse. And nobody wanted a nurse. And that just does not happen. Everybody wants nurses. You can go anywhere in the world as a registered nurse, but yet nobody wanted a nurse. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll go with this secular agency. And so I signed up with this agency, and it was I was supposed to go over to the Middle East in 1 year. Well, close to 1 year, I'd been doing lots of mission trips in that time, and then just a few months beforehand, I really started to get anxiety about my trip, because for some reason I got something in my mind that I was to go with a Christian organization, not a secular. So I told my mom this dilemma, and I said, I don't know what to do. You know, they're counting on me to be there, but yet I really feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm going with the wrong group. I'm supposed to be going with the Christian group. And she said, well, why don't you go talk to a friend of mine? My mom was doing what do you call it? She was going through school, and she needed a place to do some practicing. She wasn't an Adventist, but she was working at Loma Linda and staying with me for a while she was doing her, I can't remember what you call it. What's that? Practicum, yeah. And so she said, well, why don't you go talk to my very good friend in the missions department? And I said, well, I'm not an Adventist, and I know I'm supposed to be going long term. And she said, well, you've already been going, with Adventists to all these other missions. And okay, I guess I'll try it. And so I started to fast. I started a water fast, and I just said, God, these people are counting on me, but I really feel like I'm doing the wrong thing, so show me and guide me. And through one miracle after another, because of the time, I'm going to kind of cut it short, but I'm going to get to the chase here about this miracle, and that is I ended up talking to the SIMS lady, the longer-term missions lady at Loma Linda. She said, she gave me the phone number of the man who was in charge down in Brazil, because I really wanted to go to Brazil on the Amazon. It consumed me. My prayers consumed me that I wanted to go to the Amazon. So she said, see, I was supposed to go at a certain date with this group. And I told her, I said, well, I don't want my emergency to be your emergency, but I do kind of need to know right away, because I need to tell these people if I'm not going. And she says, well, I think what you need to do is you need to call the guy himself who's in charge down there, but I'll tell you, he's never home. And he can be gone for weeks at a time, because he has an airplane, and he runs all the luzeros along the Amazon River. So I continued my fast, and I said, Lord, if you want me to go to Brazil, on the Amazon, then you have to make this happen. And I'm going to call him in the morning. And if he answers the phone, I have no idea if he's home. I've already been told that he's gone for weeks at a time. If he answers the phone, I'll know that you are leading me. But if his wife answers, if a child answers, if he's not home, I'll know automatically you are not leading me. I call, he picks up the phone. And then then he finds out I'm not an Adventist, and he says, well, we only allow Adventists to go on longer-term missions. And I said, no problem, because I was praying about it, and I said, Lord, you use his voice to tell me. And so when he said no, that had nothing to do with him and me. It was just between God and me. God used his voice. And he said, well, no, just let me explain why we don't, generally have non-Adventists. Our women, generally dress a lot more conservative. And I said, oh, boy, believe me, from the way that I used to dress, God has really dealt with me with the way I dress. And he says, yeah, and we don't drink coffee. And I said, oh, I hate coffee. I've never drank it in my whole life. And then he said, what else did he say? We don't eat pork. We don't eat pork. And I said, oh, that stuff's disgusting. I quit eating that years ago. I mean, that had nothing to do with my Christianity. Well, we don't drink alcohol and we don't use tobacco. And I said, oh, I've been through that phase in my life. I gave that up long ago, well before I knew God. And he says, well, why don't you come? And I said, oh no, you said no to begin with, so I'm gonna pass. And I said, but I'll, and then he continued to really encourage me to come. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about it, and I'll call you back tomorrow. And I called him back, and I said, so did you think about it? And he said, think about what? And I said, well, about me going. And he's like, no, I asked you, and I meant it. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I guess I'm going. And I just knew peace flooded me. And so then I found out that, and he said, well, there's a group from Loma Linda that is coming on this day, and you can get a hold of this person, because now we're talking only 2 or 3 days ahead of time that I was leaving. And it was 2 weeks, 2 weeks ahead of time. And so I told the Lord, I said, okay, God, I'm going to call him, and if I can get on that flight at that time, I'll know you're leading me. But if I can't, I'll know that you're not leading me. And the man told me when the group was leaving, on what flight. I called, they had 1 seat left, and I took it. And I was like, wow, God, this is amazing. And so I get to Brazil, I do my 2 weeks of jungle nursing training, and then I had heard all the horror stories about the furthest west of the Amazon, and it's like, oh my word, I don't want to go there. And afterwards I go talk to the pastor. I said, where are you taking me? Beijing, furthest west of the Amazon. And of course I prayed, God used his voice, so it wasn't him, it was from God. And I didn't even say a word to him. I just turned around and went right to my room, and I said, God, I'm not going. That's all there is to it. I'm not going. I'm too scared. I don't know Portuguese. Most of the time they don't have medical supplies, and that's it. I'm not going. And you know how God softens our heart as we, complain, and we tell him what we want and what we will and won't do, He just patiently listens until we're kind of half-winded and we're done complaining, and then he's like, hello, what about me? And I just said, okay, God, then you need to be my translator. You need to do everything for me. You need to teach me jungle nursing when I don't have the proper supplies. You're going to have to do everything. You're going to have to literally show me every step along the way, because I'm terrified. And so after I went to Beijing and had met several people, but I don't want to get into mission stories right now, but I have many, but I want to get into my conversion to kind of get back on track with that. And so I'm on the boat now, and I cleaned my office, because I'm on a boat and my office is the only inside room, and so I know where everything is. Everything's clean, and I'm all prepared now to do my nursing. And then several days later, I'm just kind of thinking, I'd like to do some studies, because on the way to the next village, sometimes it took 2 or 3 days. And so what am I going to do for 2 or 3 days? And so I just decided to stick my head in the Bible. And I just said, well, God, what should I study? And the Sabbath was the very first thing that he tried to teach me, because I just talked to the young lady missionary and said, well, we're going to be together for a while. And like, I go to church on Sunday, you go to church on Saturday. Like, what's the big deal? She opened up the Bible to the 4th commandment. I slammed the Bible closed, and I said, that's it. I don't need to know anymore. Thank you. And so when I asked God, what should I study? And he tried to impress upon me to study the Sabbath again, because I had some people that meant very much to me in my life that told me that they would disown me if I became a Seventh-day Adventist. So, of course, I became very closed to it. I would not study with anybody. And when God was impressing upon me to study the Sabbath, it was arm's length. God, I'll study something else, but I'm not going to study the Sabbath. I didn't know what I was rejecting, of course. So I said, well, what else? And so the first study that I studied was the state of the dead. And I had been living my life as if my husband was in heaven. And then I found out that he was actually sleeping. I found all 53 days, 53 times in the Bible where it says that when we are dead, we're sleeping. So-and-so slept with his fathers and he died, in the Old Testament, the New Testament. And I thought it was strange that Lazarus, if he went to heaven for that time while he was dead, why didn't he come back and talk about it? I mean, I just had these questions. And then I realized that my husband was sleeping, and I was completely set free. And I just said, wow, Lord, what else? And then I started studying something else, and the millennium, and just like everything. So I then finally, after the end of months of studying, day after day after day, literally hours and hours, sometimes 8-9 hours a day, I was studying in my Bible. I didn't have, a care in the world about anything. I didn't care about anything in the world. All I cared about was what I was learning, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I said, okay, God, I think I'm willing to finally study the Sabbath, because now I learned that I actually there is a truth in the Bible to know, and that we don't have to have confusion. There aren't 2 truths in the Bible, there's only one. And now I was gaining confidence that I can actually study enough in order to know this truth. So I started studying the Sabbath from every direction you could imagine, and I'm fasting. And there's a book that, keep in mind, I'd already cleaned up my office in the room on the boat, and I open up a drawer, and there's a book called the Marked Bible. Where did this come from? I cleaned this whole office. It just and so I asked everybody on the boat, is this your book? No one had ever seen it before. Well, where did this book come from? So I just, I didn't know what was in the book, so I started fasting again. And I was like, I don't want to be deceived by anything. And I'll tell you, that book spoke to me. It talked about the Sabbath from every single direction you can imagine. And then I started studying for weeks. Then I'm studying about the Sabbath. And I am just amazed at what I'm learning. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the feast days and the Sabbath days, and Jesus laying in the tomb on the Sabbath, and Paul keeping the Sabbath, and Jesus was long risen after Paul. And even in Revelation, when John is talking about the Sabbath, and so I just said, okay, God, I'm going to lose these people in my life now. I'm convicted of the Sabbath. I now know that Friday sundown to Saturday sundown is the true Sabbath. But my question to you, does it matter to you which day I keep? What does it matter if I go to church on Sunday? And though I know Sabbath is the day, does it matter? So, I said, Lord, I'm just going to fast until the day I die, until you intervene. Because for me not to have these particular people in my life, I might as well be dead. Because I love them so much, and I can't bear the thought of I go home and they disown me. So I might as well just die anyway. So, and I just told God, I'm going to die. I'm going to fast from today until the day I die, unless you intervene somewhere in a very clear way. So I'm fasting and fully ready to die, fully ready, because I really didn't know how God would speak to me out in the middle of the Amazon, and nobody knows English, and I just had no idea how this would even happen. But all I knew was that my heart, I knew I could not continue to live out of my love. And so I continued to fast for several days, and then I went to the pastor's house, and I told the pastor, I said, so there was a DVD playing. I said, where did you get this DVD? And he said, well, it just came today. And I said, and where did you get this DVD player? Well, that just came today too. And I said, so I thought you didn't know English because this DVD is in English. But then it was dubbed over in Portuguese, the scrolling words on the bottom. And I'm like, okay, there's something strange about this situation here. And I just knew that I knew. And to make kind of a longer story short, is I knew my answer was in that DVD. And Satan tried to divert me from my fasting because I was not going to stop my fast until I knew that I knew that the Sabbath, that it mattered to God. So I knew that my answer was in that, and the young lady missionary said, well, you already know where your answer is, so why don't you eat this ice cream with me? No, I'm not going to. She prodded me and prodded me and prodded me to eat this ice cream with her. We went to Peru, and like I told her, and I couldn't wait to get back to the pastor's house to watch this DVD, and it was Mark Finley, Mark of the Beast. And I watched it, and I'll tell you, the alligator tears came. And by the time I was done listening to that, I was just in tears, not really understanding or knowing what I had just rejected all these months. And I finally accepted the Sabbath. And then I got down on my knees and I said, God, please forgive me for being so hard-headed. I did not realize what I was rejecting. And I accept your Sabbath. I know I'm going to lose these people when I get home. And you're just going to have to bring me a family because I'm going to lose mine. And so, the great thing about God is when it came time for me to renew my visa to stay, I already knew it wouldn't, I was there for 5 months. It took God 5 months, to reach through my hard head. But he couldn't have done it, I don't think, any other way. He could have taken my right arm. He could have taken anything from me other than my husband. My husband's the only thing that probably would have ever brought me to him, and that's why. But he died. He's sleeping in the Lord. He's safe, and I'm now the one who has to run the good race if I want to see him again. And I did. I went home after that, and sure enough, the people who said they would disown me did. And God's brought me then a worldwide church family. And then I started doing more missions, and I went over to Nepal and India for another 9 months, but God has replaced that family that I lost, and it took time for them to realize that I wasn't part of a cult, and that I still love them, and I'm still me, and they eventually did come back to me. And so now I enjoy a nice relationship with them again. And I still have a worldwide family that God has brought me, so I've gotten that double blessing. And so I just thank God. I know that he leads each one of us in our own ways, and I know that all of you have stories as well. And I just thank God that he knows what each one of us needs, because had I been near, my brother, my sister, my niece, and others who had come to the Lord through my conversion, I probably would have not been so open. As it was, it already took me 5 months and of really hardcore learning. And I went back to the pastor. I should say this before I end. I went back to the pastor in Brazil, and I said, "You will not believe what I learned. I believed about the state of the dead and the millennium and all this, probably rattled off 20 beliefs or something." And he just stood there and he smiled and he said, "Welcome to the Seventh-day Adventist Church." And here I thought I was learning, something so new and profound, and, I thought I was teaching him. And boy, I knew then that when God said, "Don't get too comfortable, that it's only for a temporary time," see, I knew I had to grow. And before I could really understand more Bible truths. And so I thank God for the way that he's led me. We have brothers and sisters in Sunday churches and who aren't even in the church yet, and that we need to just really embrace and love, because we're all a work in a process. And we, just like everybody else out there, who are on that God is leading them on the path. Let us be a light for them as well. So I just want to end in prayer here. Would you like to end in prayer?
Sure. Let's pray. Father, indeed, you do work in mysterious ways, but we're so thankful that you don't give up on us. And I thank you for Janie and her willingness to share her story with us. And I just pray that you'll continue to be with her, as she has a vast influence in the clients that she works with. So thank you again for bringing us together, for giving us the assurance that you love each one of us, that we are, like she says, a work in progress. Be with us now as we go home. We thank you in your name. Amen. And don't forget, next week we are going to have a musical program with Dave Wallace-Chuck and some family and friends.